Welcome to the March 18th, 2024 meeting of Troy City Council. It is asked that you please silence your cell phones during the duration of our meeting. Tonight, we have a Boy Scout Troop 5 from First United Church of Christ who will lead us in the pledge after Mr. Sievert does the invocation. Please rise.
Could we please bow our heads? Father in heaven, we commit this meeting to you as we discuss the concerns of our community. Direct our thoughts, words, decisions, and actions towards the path you desire. Extend your hand to those in the community whose needs you know, and protect our first responders and all those who serve. Lord, as your will is unveiled and concerns in our community become more stable, let us always remember and honor your divine blessings bestowed upon this congregation known as Troy, Ohio. Amen.
Boy Scouts.
I pledge allegiance to
the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Phillips?
Here.
Mrs. Marshall?
Here.
Mr. Sievert?
Present.
Mr. Schilling?
Present.
Mr. Whidden?
Here.
Mrs. Snee? Mrs. Westfall?
Here.
Mr. Pierce? Mr. Twist?
Move to excuse Mrs. Snee.
Second. Motion to excuse Mrs. Snee by Mr. Sievert, seconded by Mr. Whidden. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee is excused.
A motion to excuse Mr. Twist.
Second.
Motion to excuse Mr. Twist made by Mr. Phillips, seconded by Mrs. Westfall. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist is excused.
Motion to excuse Mr. Pierce.
Second.
Motion to excuse Mr. Pierce by Mr. Whidden, seconded by Mrs. Westfall. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce is excused.
Since we have 3 members of council absent tonight, it will not be possible for the council to suspend the rules and take action on any of the legislative items. Mrs. Knight, could you please read the summary of the minutes of March 4th, 2024?
Minutes of Council, March 4, 2024. Committee reports. Community Partnerships Committee recommended legislation be prepared authorizing the transfer of canal lands to the City of Troy, with that land located at the corner of Mulberry and Race Streets. Law and Ordinance Committee recommended legislation be prepared to amend Chapter 375 of the Codified Ordinances related to mobility devices, bike lanes, and shared youth paths. Committee recommended legislation be prepared extending the moratorium regarding specific uses within the DRO boundary. Committee of the Whole provided a report regarding the recent council workshop. Ordinance number 06-2024, repealing Chapter 375 bikeways, enacting new Chapter 375 was given first reading and was adopted. Ordinance number 07-2024, a new extending moratorium for a period of 90 days regarding specific uses in the boundary of the DRO district, first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 08-2024, transfer of canal lands, was given first reading and was adopted. Following various comments, council adjourned at 7:25 p.m.
Move to accept the minutes.
Second.
Motion to accept the minutes by Mr. Whidden, seconded by Mr. Phillips. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Whidden,
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling.
Yes.
Minutes are approved.
We have 4 committee reports tonight. We'll start with the Community Partnerships Committee. Mrs. Marshall.
This committee met March 11th to consider use agreements for the June 22nd and August 3rd concerts at Treasure Island Park, as those concerts will include the sale of alcoholic beverages at Treasure Island Park, and to further consider the temporary activation of an area of the DORA to include Treasure Island Park for the 2 concerts, as well as for a concert on July 4th. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to execute the Treasure Island Park non-ticketed use agreements for the June 22nd and August 3rd, 2024 concerts at Treasure Island Park, and that legislation be prepared to authorize the temporary activation of an area of the DORA for the concerts on June 22nd, July 4th, and August 3rd. Respectfully submitted by Mr. Sievert, Mr. Twist, and myself as chair.
Any questions? All right. Move on to Finance. Mr. Sievert.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Finance Committee met March 11th to review the recommendations of the Tax Incentive Review Council regarding the compliance status of the Troy Town Park TIF and the 5 enterprise zone agreements that were in place as of December 31st, 2023. Such review and report is required on an annual basis. The TIRC, Tax Incentive Review Council, recommended that the TIF agreement and the remaining 5 enterprise zone agreements be continued. We note the agreement number 36 with Arca Brazy Inc. is being continued with the stipulation stated in the detailed report. Wherefore, it is recommended that legislation be prepared accepting the recommendation of the TIRC, that the 5 current enterprise zone agreements be continued, that the Troy Town Park TIF be continued, and that the city must file an annual report with the Ohio Department of Development by the end of March regarding the continuance of the agreements in the TIF. Committee supports emergency legislation. Respectfully submitted, Mr. Schilling, Ms. Westfall, and myself as chairman. I don't know what we do if we can't do emergency because we don't have the people. So with Lynn's unfortunate incident, but
I think that's what generated your email today. All
Yeah.
the dates. Okay. Any questions on that, other than not being able to pass? That takes us to Safety and Health. Mr. Whidden is filling in for Mr. Twist tonight.
Thank you, Mr. President. This committee met on March 11th regarding the routine updating of the Emergency Operations Plans, EOP. The basic document is unchanged from the previous approved plan. Changes reflect current staffing and any modifications required per federal or state guidelines. Routine review and updating by city staff is a requirement of the EOP. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared to approve the 2024 Emergency Operations Plans so that the most concurrent edition of the EOP is in place. The committee supports emergency legislation. It is respectively submitted by Mr. Sievert, myself, and Mr. Twist as chair.
Any questions on that? That takes us to Streets and Sidewalk Committee. Mr. Phillips.
Thank you, sir. This committee met on March 11 to discuss bidding authorization for the Broadford Bridge Rehabilitation Project. While this bridge is owned by the state of Ohio, the city is responsible for minor maintenance. An evaluation has shown that work is needed to eliminate hazards, preserve the concrete area, and extend the lifespan of the structure. The project estimate is $260,000, which exceeds the $180,000 budgeted amount. There is sufficient appropriation in the Capital Improvement Budget, Fund 441, for the project estimate. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the Broadford Bridge State Route 41 East Rehabilitation Project at a cost not to exceed $260,000. And this is respectfully submitted by Mr. Schilling, Mrs. Westfall, and myself as chair.
Any questions on that? Thank you very much.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion to approve
the Troy City Council rules for procedure as discussed in the committee of the whole meeting a couple weeks ago.
Motion to approve the city council rules for procedure made by Mr. Schilling, seconded by Mr. Whidden. Mrs. Knight, could you please call the roll?
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Motion is approved. The rules are adopted.
Thank you. We now come to citizen comments on any of the committee reports or anything on our agenda. You'll have a 2-minute time limit at this part. Please come to the podium, give your name and address for Mrs. Knight, and
Hi, I'm Steve Hendrickson at 975 Dickerson Drive. First, let me explain that regarding the Odd Fellows building, I don't care. I'm neutral on it. I don't care if it gets rebuilt or replaced. Either's okay by me. Isn't the executive session?
I don't think that's,
Is the executive session on the agenda? Looks like it's on.
yes, but at this point, I don't know what we're covering in the executive session.
Well, I'm going to guess just based on the room. Okay, you can do it. You are coming back, though, right?
Yes, we will.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? All right, Mrs. Knight, could you please read Resolution 12, 2024?
Resolution number R12, 2024, resolution accepting the recommendations of the Tax Incentive Review Council and declaring an emergency. This is the first reading.
Any questions?
If I may, since we cannot suspend the rules and vote on any of these items tonight, can we take them en masse just by reading all of the resolutions and ordinances and then request to go to a second reading?
No, we need to do it individually.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Mrs. Knight, could you please read R13, 2024?
Resolution number R13, 2024, resolution accepting the recommendation of the Tax Incentive Review Council for the Troy Town Park TIF and declaring an emergency. The recommendation is that the TIF be extended. This is the first reading.
Could you continue with Resolution R14, 2024?
Resolution number R14, 2024, resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the Broadford Bridge State Route 41 East Rehabilitation Project, cost not to exceed $260,000. First reading.
Any questions? Could we proceed to ordinances 09, 2024, please?
Ordinance number 09, 2024, ordinance adopting the City of Troy, Ohio Emergency Operations Plan and declaring an emergency. This is the first reading.
No questions. Could you please continue with ordinance 10?
Ordinance number 010, 2024, ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio to execute a Treasure Island non-ticketed use agreement for 2024 events of the Treasure Island Park. This is the first reading.
Ordinance 011, 2024, please.
Ordinance number 011, 2024, ordinance permitting use of certain real property in the designated outdoor refreshment area for use as a designated outdoor refreshment area for events on June 22, July 4th, and August 3, 2024. This is also the first reading.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that we recess into executive session to confer with legal counsel concerning disputes that are the subject of pending or imminent court action.
Second that.
Motion to move into executive session by Mr. Schilling, seconded by, Mr. Phillips. Mrs. Knight, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Motion is adopted.
After executive session, we will return to finish the items on the agenda.
I'd like to make a motion to return from our executive session and restart the city council meeting, please.
Second that.
Motion to resume council meeting by Mr. Schilling, seconded by Mr. Phillips. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
We're back in regular session. Motion is adopted.
On behalf of council and administration, thank you for your interest tonight in the town that you chose to be your home and the patience you shown for our lengthy executive session. We've now come to the point of comments from the audience on anything. Please
No.
come forward.
We need to go, the mayor.
Or you gotta,
Oh, I'm sorry. Trying to speed things up. Mayor, do you have any comments tonight?
I do not, thank you.
Mr. Titterton,
Do we have any communications?
No, sir, I have no communication. Thank you.
other than the financial disclosure sheets?
I hate to drag it on, but I've got to do my calendar duty. We did open Dye Mill facility today. It is open for the season through the end of November. We do have spring cleanup coming up April 1st through the 5th, and that's important. A lot of people take advantage of that because you're allowed to exceed the total limits and put brush out. The only thing we ask is that leaves and any kind of loose grass needs to be bagged, but there's no limit on that if you can't get to the Dye Mill facility. That's all I have. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I just briefly, and I hate to prolong it as well, but I do want to take this opportunity as an at-large council member to thank those who came out. We will continue to have those quarterly meetings. We had about 20 people. It was a vibrant discussion about various and sundry issues. Some issues have been passed on to the administration for further review. Others were just general discussion comments, and some people were just there to be there. But I appreciate everybody who showed up, and we will continue to do those and continue to outreach to allow input from our citizens.
Anyone else? We just ask that you keep Mrs. Snee's family in your thoughts and prayers. She had a death in her family and resulting in her absence tonight. So now we are ready for public comments. Yes, and
seeing none.
what we'll do, and when we're doing, come on, Steve, as we're doing this, we will take your questions. They will record them, and the administration will provide you answers as soon as possible.
Great.
Because we won't get into a back and forth exchange on answers and stuff.
Okay. Welcome back.
Thank you.
We all missed you. Well, not everybody. I'm Steve Hendrickson at 975 Dickerson Drive. As I said before, I'm pretty neutral on the Odd Fellows building. I really don't care one way or the other whether it gets rebuilt or replaced. Either one's okay as long as it gets done sometime in my lifetime. But having said that, I'm extremely proud of being in a city whose citizens got together and pulled together a whole bunch of money that made it possible for them to consider repairing the building. I think it's a wonderful civic activity that they did. They raised almost $750,000, which I think is just demands all of our attention. Having said that, I'm still a little tired of this topic after 2 years. I was glad that last year that all the heads of state got together and wound up having an agreement among the city and the association and the historical society to move forward and have some deadlines. And that was wonderful. And I thought, geez, finally there's an end in sight in this thing. So that was pretty good. Repairs are underway. There's a big crane out there. There's scaffolding. There's a whole bunch of activity going on. I thought, finally, it looks like there's going to be an end to this. But no. Somebody decided to send a letter to the court again. Everybody knows that's certainly an expeditious way of getting anything done is go to a court. So anyway, letter goes to the court, written by an outside attorney from Kettering, who I'm sure knows everything he needs to know about the situation here. But anyway, and then the Historical Society has come before this committee, not the committee, but the council, every time you've met, and gave you an update on here it is, here's what we're doing, here's how much money we've got, here's the outlook. And not once did anybody say, oh, we're ready to sabotage it, we're ready to call in an attorney and stop you. Stop you now, so they haven't got a ghost of a chance of meeting the deadline. That's chicken spit. It's got a silent H. Well, you understand what I mean. How can you sit there, listen to these folks, and not say a blankety-blank word until, oh, we're going to send a letter to the court again. Whoever did that should be ashamed, and it's a blot on the city's name. I know you just got back from an executive session. I'm hoping you had a great time and you sang Kumbaya by the time you get done. But I certainly hope that you spent time there trying to find out who in their right mind decided to hire an outside counsel and stop this thing 6 weeks from when the blankety-blank work was going to get done anyway, or not get done. Why the big hurry? You had 6 more weeks. All you had to do was do nothing. But no, the big shots or whatever the heck whoever was behind this thought, oh well, we'll just show everybody how smart we are, and we'll see if we can find some paragraph somewhere where the Historical Society didn't fulfill their obligations. I'm just beyond words about what I think, and quite frankly, I'm hoping you discussed how we do recall elections here so we can get rid of the current people. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Steve.
Good evening. Ben Southerly, President of the Troy Historic Preservation Alliance, 110.5 West Main Street in Troy. Concerning the IOF building, Old Miami County Courthouse, we'd like to give an update on our progress with the stabilization repairs. It would have been hard not to notice the tremendous amount of activity around the building this past week. Most of the original roof on the Old Miami County Courthouse has been removed, and new trusses have been installed in place of that roof. Masonry work continues to fix the parapet of the IOF portion of the building that fronts onto West Main Street, and additional stabilization work continues inside portions of both buildings. We are tremendously proud of the progress that Level NB and their subcontractors have made on this project, despite barriers being thrown in their path. For example, requiring signed and sealed drawings for the scaffolding, which is an unprecedented requirement in Miami County. Next, an update on our fundraising. To date, we have raised more than $777,000 in donations. Toward the stabilization repairs of the IOF Old Miami County Courthouse. In addition, we have a private commitment for a $50,000 loan to cover additional incidental costs, including a load test if it becomes clear that one is necessary. That's a total of $827,000, more than enough to complete stabilization repairs to both buildings and pay for related costs. Let me just stop there for a minute so that can sink in. THPA has been able to harness more than $1.3 million in funding to purchase the building at full price, $485,000, and to raise the money necessary to stabilize it, $827,000. Less than 3 months after the settlement agreement was reached. Of the $827,000 earmarked for repairs and related costs, you might get your pencil ready, Patrick, since I know you're keeping close notes on this. We have collected more than $804,000, or 97% of that total, some of which has already been spent. So we only have about $23,000 left to collect. Because some of our funding for the building repairs is in the form of a loan, we continue to request donations from the public. We continue to encourage folks to sponsor a brick for $100 per brick at our website, www.thpatroy.org. No public tax dollars from the City of Troy or any other source are going into these stabilization repairs. All of this support came from more than 225 individuals, businesses, and organizations who love and believe in our downtown. Our city leaders should be doing cartwheels over this kind of progress. Instead, Mr. Titterington continues to throw wet blanket after wet blanket on our efforts. Mr. Titterington, I have my wife's hairdryer out in my truck, and after the meeting, I thought we could use it to dry out the stockpile wet blankets in your office. In the months since we agreed to stabilize the building, we requested just two things from the city, two minor things. We asked that the city use the IOF building, Old Miami County Courthouse, to describe the building instead of the name of a former bar, and we requested that the city manage up the project. Such minor requests, and the city has refused us the courtesy. I think I need your full and undivided attention, Mr. Titterington.
Your email as I go along.
Okay, all right.
I'm engaged.
I'll take, I hope so. You need to be engaged, sir.
Ben,
Where,
Ben,
okay.
can you just address us and just read what you need to
The city
read?
has refused us the courtesy of both of these minor requests. Instead, we constantly hear through the rumor mill that city officials are saying that the building is coming down. Where is the good faith called for in the settlement agreement? Certainly not at City Hall. Despite this, our fundraising continues undeterred. Our art auction just concluded yesterday and raised another $11,500 for our cause. Let's talk about the next wet blanket. Mr. Titterington decides to spend taxpayer dollars on outside legal counsel to tattle on THPA to the judge. In a March 8th letter, the city made baseless claims that THPA has violated the settlement agreement and actually asked the judge to consider several draconian options, including issuing a stop work order on the old courthouse building and ordering THPA to demolish the old courthouse. Mr. Titterington's view is that THPA was required to provide by March 1st proof that we have the funding necessary to address all items in Exhibit B of the settlement agreement. Exhibit B is the Miami County Chief Building Official's list of required repairs. While we certainly respect Mr. Titterington's view, we would like to share with you how we see the requirement, which we took very seriously. Let's look at what the settlement agreement actually says. No later than March 1st, 2024, THPA shall notify the city and the chief building official in writing whether it intends to undertake all work for the 1841 building identified by the chief building official for items discovered subsequent to purchase as necessary to abate defective conditions, stabilize the 1841 building, and lift adjudication order number 36. In the event that THPA elects to perform this necessary work for the 1841 building, THPA shall provide the city with written proof that it has sufficient funds necessary for such work. So let's unpack that. Both the 1902 and 1841 portions of the building have defective conditions. We all agree on that. Both portions of the building require stabilization repairs. Repairs to the 1841 portion of the building are necessary to lift the adjudication order, and repairs to the 1902 portion of the building are necessary to lift the adjudication order. For whatever reason, this section of the settlement agreement focuses specifically on the 1841 portion of the building. THPA documented that it had sufficient funds to complete this work, plus more than $140,000 beyond that. Why wasn't the city more clear that it wanted documentation that THPA had sufficient funding to address every single item in Exhibit B? Instead, the city is bothering the judge and is asking her to consider issuing a stop work order or ordering the old courthouse demolished altogether. Why is City Hall being so punitive? It's another unnecessary distraction that is costing taxpayers and is intended to disrupt progress on the building. Here we have another case of Mr. Titterington's obsession with being right instead of doing the right thing. In the city's March 8th letter to the judge, the outside legal counsel paid for by taxpayers, writing on behalf of Mr. Titterington, the legal counsel makes the following statement. The December 22nd, 2023 settlement agreement contains several conditions and deadlines. Some of these conditions and deadlines may have been violated or missed, and the city has to date, in the interest of bringing this matter to resolution, looked the other way. Now, I know we're not having direct dialogue tonight, but I would appreciate if you could list, on your list of questions, clarifying for me which conditions and deadlines the city feels have been missed, because never were any brought to our attention until that letter was sent. So I'm looking forward to that explanation. On page 10 of the settlement agreement, section 5, it states that the chief building official and the city of Troy shall take all steps necessary to expedite plan review and process the application for all necessary permits. So I don't know if there was some deadline missed for some permit, but it's very clear from the outset that any kind of review is supposed to be expedited. The letter also throws shade at THPA for not itemizing the cost of individual items such as window work. While we are getting quotes for window work, we are not required to repair windows as part of the ongoing stabilization repairs. We have no obligation to the city to itemize the cost of those repairs. Again, another wet blanket. Clearly, THPA has demonstrated that it has sufficient funding in place to see the project through. It's not like we've raised $50,000 and have 3 volunteers out working on the building. We have all the necessary funding. We have a downtown Troy-based company with an impeccable reputation in place that's leading this work and will complete it by deadline. The city should not be trying to move the goalposts on us. You can disagree with our interpretation of the settlement agreement if you wish, but it is a valid interpretation. It's time to move on. Speaking of moving the goalposts, as part of its approval of a building permit for the stabilization work, the Miami County Building Department inappropriately put in place a condition requiring a load test. This is an unprecedented step for Miami County to take. It is also a violation of the settlement agreement. A load test was never discussed during negotiations that led to the settlement agreement. Further, the settlement agreement states if the independent plans examiner approves the THPA's stamped drawings, then the acting county chief building official shall also approve them unless approval is contrary to law. Under such circumstances, the chief building official does not have the discretion to tack on conditions such as a load test. In this case, we have confirmed that the independent plans examiner approved the stamped drawings without conditions. No deficiencies in the stamped drawings were identified. The acting chief building official then came up with the idea of a load test and inappropriately placed a condition on the building permit. This violates the terms of the settlement agreement and is frankly duplicative and a government overreach. A load test is likely to cost somewhere around $30,000. It is unnecessary, as all structural deficiencies are already being addressed through the stamped drawings that Level and B structural engineer submitted, and that the independent plans examiner, who is also a structural engineer, approved. As a side note, the county's chief building official, Rob England, was not supposed to be involved at all with the building permit process, yet the county's building permit is signed by him. You might be thinking that's something THPA should take up with Miami County, not with the city. If that is your perspective, I urge you to consider it from a different angle. Anything that potentially interferes with getting West Main Street reopened as soon as possible and that leaves a huge gap in our historic streetscape should be a matter of concern to all city leaders. I hear council members talking about trying to help downtown businesses who have been affected by the street closure. This is how you help downtown businesses. Do not interfere with this work. Let it get done. Let the street get reopened as soon as possible. The City of Troy contracts with Miami County for these services. Through public records requests, it is clear that Mr. Titterington has had regular contact in the past with the chief building official regarding this building. The outcome of this situation is of intense interest to Mr. Titterington. to an unhealthy degree. It stands to reason that the city exerts influence on the Miami County Building Department when it chooses to do so. If you think a load test might seem appropriate for reasons of public safety, I sent you all a letter yesterday. I hope you had a chance to read that. I'm not sure if the city administration shared it with you last month when it was provided to them. The letter is stamped by 2 structural engineers who have spent more time in the building than any other structural engineer during the past 4 years. They found that the building is not in imminent danger of collapsing. One might wonder then why West Main Street has been closed in front of the building for the past 9 months. Great question. At any rate, the load test is an unnecessary requirement. It violates the settlement agreement and was not done out of good faith, but out of an erroneous assumption that the chief building official was empowered by the settlement agreement to add conditions freely and unilaterally to the building permit, regardless of whether it's necessary. Further, to our knowledge, Miami County has never before required signed and stamped drawings for scaffolding. The city normally provides scaffolding permits but gave no advance notice to THPA or Level MB that it was going to punt that responsibility to the county, which then required signed and stamped drawings. All things that could have been communicated up front. Instead, it cost us 5 working days. Put another way, the street could have opened 5 days sooner if city and county officials were proactive about their expectations. Again, this is a sign of ongoing efforts to be punitive and pile on unnecessary costs and delays. It is government overreach in the truest sense. To conclude, the residents of the city of Troy and Miami County deserve answers to the following questions. What does the city hope to gain by hiring outside counsel and trying to put a stop to work on the old courthouse at this point? What makes you think that THPA is incapable of completing this work? 2, why is the Miami County Building Department, which is under contract with the city of Troy, requiring a load test? This is a question you all should be asking. How does the public benefit from such a test when signed and stamped drawings have already been approved by structural engineers attesting that the repairs outlined in the drawings are sufficient to stabilize the building? 3, what communication has Mr. Titterington had with the Miami County Building Department in recent months regarding the building? 4, how is the city supporting the THPA's efforts to repair the building and get the street reopened as soon as possible? The city should be encouraging Miami County not to require a load test, given that it is a violation of the settlement agreement, is unnecessary and duplicative, and it could delay the reopening of the street. Thank you for your consideration of the points made in this email. I will leave you with this thought. How will it reflect on City Hall and on all of you elected officials if Mr. Titterington is allowed to continue to sabotage $1.3 million in investment in our downtown, potentially causing delays in reopening West Main Street and significantly diminishing our downtown's charm? Please take a moment to think about how this looks to the community.
Anyone else?
Marla Fair, 303 and a half Public Square, Troy, Ohio, wife of David Fair, got a business downtown. I've worked at the Johnston Farm for 20 years. I think the people of Piqua Troy are ashamed of you guys. The people of Piqua are behind the Johnston Farm. If you look at pictures of that place 50 years ago, you would have ripped it down. It was a mess. It was falling apart. There were boards off the barn. I've got photos I can show you. It is now one of the premier sites in Ohio. We host thousands of people a year. We bring money to our economy in Piqua. What has Troy tried to do? We've tried to tear down the church where William Henry Harrison stood on the steps and opened the canal. We're trying to tear down the courthouse where my ancestors stood and went through cases where the Randolph County freedmen stood and were told they were free. How dare you? How dare you think of tearing down that building? I'm sorry if it's not expedient. Neither was the Johnston Farm. People wanted it torn down and they wanted water to wash over it, to turn it into a lake. It's there, I'm there. We talk about Mr. Johnson every day. Let somebody stand in this old courthouse and talk about Troy's history, about the importance of our legal things in this town. Look at what we've done. Look at what our history is in that courthouse. I know some of you, a building means nothing. But there are those of us that, I walked through those doors the other day where my ancestors had walked. It was an unbelievably moving feeling. And you will bring many people to this town who will walk into those doors and will have that same feeling. There are a lot of us out there. There's a lot of us who love history. So please, beyond the money, beyond the numbers, beyond the crunching, I know it's a hard issue, but think about what your town is. On the edge of town, what do we have written? Historic downtown Troy. Why do you want to rip down our history? I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mrs. Fair. Anyone else? All right, we are adjourned. The next meeting is April 1st.